Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Granite Cornerstone episode number 13, where we're going to talk about social media in Freemasonry. Joining me tonight, we have Right Worshipful Brother Scott Newberry and Right Worshipful Brother Chris Busby, both members of the Grand Lodge Communications Committee, who are also responsible for helping to manage and monitor the Grand Lodge Facebook and social media channels. So, welcome, Scott and Chris.
Evening, Tim.
Chris, you're on mute, I think, there, buddy.
Yes, I am. Good evening.
Good evening and welcome to the show. And welcome to all of our viewers. Thank you for joining us this evening. So, social media. It's a big topic. There's a lot that goes into this topic. But I think one of the things that I would really like to talk about is, sort of what social media, what its role is in the fraternity, how we can make use of it and how we should make use of it as individuals. But also, I think one of the things that we don't really think about when we talk about social media and Freemasonry is how the lodge and the fraternity as a whole can make use of it to improve our outreach or improve the Masonic experience. So let's get into it. Chris, you are largely responsible for managing the Facebook page and social media channels of the Grand Lodge. I believe you're also largely responsible as secretary for managing those same channels for your own lodge.
Mm-hmm.
Scott doesn't even know what Facebook is. But
to be fair, I'm in one of those groups that while I have a Facebook account, I don't utilize it to the same level a lot of other people do. I've had some challenges with it, and I've had some less than stellar experiences with some individuals on it, and just decided that it doesn't fit where I want to be in life right now. So I just made that decision. I don't have anything against Facebook in and of itself, other than the fact that I think they've got their tentacles into everything, but that's just me.
And you know what? I think that's fair. I think one of the things we need to talk about tonight, and this has come up in the past, is that Facebook is the default social media, right? But there are so many other channels out there. And when we start talking about a social media strategy for a lodge, for the Grand Lodge, for this podcast, we really do need to consider those other channels and sort of how we approach those audiences and how we can best utilize branching out from Facebook. Facebook is the easy one. It's something a lot of people use in their personal life. And then I know, Scott, you're an active Twitter user. And there are definitely other social media platforms out there. So, Chris, from your perspective, let's talk about, what you can do with social media. What do you think is the strongest aspect of social media when it comes to the fraternity?
Well, it's the the exponential piece of it, right? I mean, you share something on Facebook, and you have a user share it or several users share it. It's going to reach each of those people's users and beyond and beyond and beyond. And that's the wonderful thing about it. The term viral comes from that, right? It comes from the idea of how things spread on social media. To your earlier point, I think that one of the things that we don't think about as much is that, social media is at a particular place in its age. I think that different demographics are using it in different ways. I think that we're finding that older users, and I'm going to use that in air quotes, are tend to sort of utilize things like Facebook and Twitter more frequently, whereas things like Instagram and Snapchat are more geared toward younger users. A lot of us don't tend to think about those demographic differences because we kind of lump everything into a single group. Social media is social media, but it isn't. And so there are different ways to be able to use each of those platforms that are not that are similar but not the same, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. I think that one of the biggest things we do when we start sharing things on social media is most lodges are more than happy to share a picture of an event. Those pictures with a small blurb can also be cross-posted to Instagram and reach an entirely different audience. And I think, the amount of effort that goes into that is relatively minimal.
Yeah, I think we overthink this, and I think that because driving content, certainly from the perspective of our communications committee, I think that is the big struggle, right? Is to be able to obtain content from folks, and I think that a lot of when we think about that, it ends up being long form content rather than sort of those quick hits, and I think that even if you have those quick hits where you have an image of an event or an image related to, even if it's just a degree, a brother that's been raised, and highlighting that particular brother and the work that the lodge is doing in a quick hit, I think is very important. So I think that is one of the things that we sort of run the risk of doing, is that we don't think. Even sometimes I'm guilty of this myself, even as a member of the communications committee, sitting in a Grand Lodge meeting and something happens and thinking, oh, gee, I should break out my camera because this might be something that the Grand Lodge Facebook page or the Instagram page might, it might be very good for. And it's just sort of assigning somebody to be able to do that and think about that and stay on top of those things is very important. And there are a lot of very quick hit opportunities for that, I think.
Well,
Yeah, I think
one of the things you have to keep in mind too is that sometimes those quick hits can point back to a longer form piece.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the things that sometimes we miss out on, is the fact that you could have a larger article and you could just pull a snippet out with a photo and point somebody back to it. The other thing to keep in mind too is that you could do the same type of thing on Twitter that you do on Instagram, photo, short blurb, and it hits another completely different audience. Because I know that there are folks out there that, they just, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, when they cross Facebook off their list of social media platforms, they cross all of Facebook platforms off, which includes Instagram, because Instagram is owned by Facebook. Right. So, I mean, there are those people that will just cross the whole thing off and just be done with it. So it's important to keep in mind that there's other avenues to put that stuff out. And here's something that most of us don't realize, is that email is actually the original social media network. That's how we all used to communicate before these things came out. So, dropping an email off to the brothers in your lodge doesn't have to be in the trestle board. Just shoot an email off. Same thing.
Yeah. I mean, when I first joined, Rising Sun had a Yahoo group at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Because Facebook
I remember.
Was still very old or very new. And every day you get, what you now get on Facebook through an email. So that's a really good point. I mean, there are definitely ways to access those groups of people without going to Facebook or Instagram. So we've got some comments here in the chat that, we're going to come up later, but let's talk about them now. From Bobby Colati. Many New Hampshire towns have their own Facebook page where the residents communicate about what's going on in the town. And, along those lines, Facebook is free exposure. It allows the lodge to have a presence in the community, and lodges can post about events. And I think that's one of the things that I really like talking about is we very often have events that are going on that are not just for Masons.
Yeah.
We have events that, and this is one of the things that I really, I struggled with in my earlier years in Masonry, and still do to some point. A lodge runs a fundraiser, and the majority of those funds really are coming from members of the lodge. We're cannibalizing our own members for donations, when at the same time, those comedy nights, those dinners can be open to the public. And we don't have necessarily the exposure that we need to get them out there. So we can use the tools that are available in social media to do that. And I think that's something that, every lodge should be considering for some of their events that are open to the public, your monthly breakfasts and things like that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
No, after you, sir.
No, it's an easy opportunity. And I think, Brother Bobby, had mentioned, not, sort of not having a website, right?
Yeah.
and looking at it from my own, I mean, I'm secretary of my lodge, and looking at it from the website perspective, one of the most important ways that we get expressions of interest in Freemasonry is through our website. And it's not terribly complicated, from a perspective of our web presence is pretty standard, pretty straightforward, but it's updated enough and active enough to drive that interest in Freemasonry, and sort of taking that, using those opportunities to be able. And again, I think we tend to forget about it. I think that, and plus, I think one of the problems that we have, and you mentioned, Tim, that sort of the external piece, like, for example, let's say St. Mark's Lodge, which, Scott, that's your lodge, does the Christmas tree sales is a huge fundraiser for the lodge. And we forget those opportunities to be able to broadcast that, because I think it's important for us to recognize that the audiences are split, right? We are advertising to our own brethren and to brethren in our district and brethren in our jurisdiction, but we're also advertising to the public, from the perspective of those that might be interested in Freemasonry, and even those that aren't. And, in the case of, say, Christmas tree sales for St. Mark's, they don't have to be interested in Freemasonry to buy a tree and support the lodge. So it's those opportunities that are really key to be able to draw people into what we do. And not only that, and Brother Bobby mentioned it again, is that every one of our communities in New Hampshire, I guarantee you, or anywhere, has a some sort of Facebook group or other type of social media that is good for, meant to talk about events that are happening in that particular community. And so utilizing those channels to be able to advertise about open houses or fundraisers is a very easy, low-hanging fruit for us to be able to utilize.
Yeah, and I do know that in the last year or two, our quote-unquote tree boss, the guy that actually heads up the tree sales, has been active on the various Facebook groups.
Tree boss, where can I get that? That's a great title.
All you have to do is come over to St. Mark's and run our Christmas tree sales for the season. And I'm sure our current one would love to give it to you.
And that's, Chris, the first thing you mentioned is the exponential aspect of social media.
Yeah.
We as Masons, we have lodges putting these events out. We're advertising primarily internally because we put it on either our community page or our group. But the most powerful button on Facebook is the share button.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to use that power wisely and not share everything. But at the end of the day, sharing these events to your community pages, sharing them to your friends and family who are not Freemasons, is a huge way to increase the exposure across huge swaths of people who are not on Facebook. Well, and if just one of them shares it, somebody who isn't a Freemason, you're now reaching an entire, half of my Facebook friends list, I think, at this point is Freemasons. But if one of my non-Freemason friends shares it, that's going to hundreds of people who have no idea who I am or who the lodge is, who may be exposed to an event. I mean, obviously your Christmas tree sales are an easy sort of sell to the community, but a community breakfast or community fundraising drive, those are all things that are great ways to pick up activity.
Well, yeah, I think one of the things that we have to take a look at is, and it goes back to what Chris was mentioning, is you need to know your audience. All these different social media platforms and where you do the sharing makes a difference. There's all, as it's been mentioned several times now, we have a lot of community-based groups on Facebook, so that when you add something to that particular group, It's that community versus something like, Twitter is a much more, as I like to say, it's a town crier type thing where you're actually saying something to the global audience. If someone, you have a tendency to hit a lot more people in a lot more different areas, not necessarily your local community. And it's something that you need to be aware of as you start to use these different tools. I think the other piece too, and I know it's somewhere in our list of things that we were going to talk about tonight, is depending on where the original post is, you may not be able to share it. If something goes into a private group versus a public group. And I know that was something that we're going to talk about at some point. So now's as good a time as any. But a lot of our groups are private groups, and unfortunately, you can't just take and share something that's in a private group onto your Facebook wall.
Well, so that's an important kind of distinction there. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about that we discussed earlier is the difference between a group versus a page, right?
Yep.
So a group is a member-based organization on Facebook, particularly, right? Where you have people who join and people who can see those posts, and you can set different privacy settings. But a page is more of an advertisement. It's something a business would use to illustrate their location, their hours, and add, maybe some social media posts. And, I struggle. Rising Sun has both a group and a page.
Mm-hmm.
And you really do need to know which one to post to, and based on the content of what you're looking for. But I think, again, to Scott's point, the shareability and the outreach from those posts is going to make a difference depending on what sort of, I want to say what sort of page it is, but whether it's a page or a group.
Right. If we're talking about Facebook, pages have, one of the things about Facebook in particular is that the settings for privacy, I think that, you hear a lot about, oh, gee, I don't want to be out there and be too concerned about, who will see what. The settings that allow you to be able to sort of limit the visibility or expand the visibility of a particular post are pretty broad. If you're talking about a group, for example, the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire has a private group. It's actually a secret group, which is apropos, I suppose. But a secret group on Facebook is that no one can find it, by doing a search on Facebook. You have to be specifically invited. We're keeping that group to Master Masons only. However, if you create an event, say, or you post something within a private or a secret group, and you want to share that, that's limited, right? You can't actually share something if you go to the New Hampshire Freemasons private Facebook group and you attempt to share something from there. You can't do it. And that's for good reason, right? We're trying to, keep that information among those that are trying to, that are available or able to view it. And so you have to think about your audience very specifically and decide what types of channels within Facebook. Now, Facebook is unique in that regard, is that the other channels like Twitter, for example, they don't have that. It's sort of binary, right? It's either you use it or you don't. So you kind of have to think about what that particular post is about. If it's about a degree, for example, and you want to bring brothers to a degree, they have to, if you post something to the private group, they have to be a member of that group in order to be able to see it. You might want to consider posting it somewhere else so that it can be shared, and that viral nature can really of something like Facebook can really come into play. Whereas, from a private perspective, a group perspective, you might not be able to do that quite as much.
Well, and the other thing to keep in mind too is that the other big difference between pages and groups, pages have a very limited number of people who can post to them.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's when you're thinking about setting something up, that makes a big difference. If you have someone who's, I'm going to run the Facebook page and then they're never on Facebook, they're not really helping the situation at all. So you kind of need people that are going to be active and involved and are willing to post stuff. It's something that, we've worked with at St. Mark's, we have a couple of brothers that are really interested in working on posting stuff. So they're the ones that actually handle all the postings. They may not be the ones that actually own the page, but they're the ones that are doing all the work, and they have access to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Chris mentioned that I wanted to touch on is private groups. So most lodges have public groups because that's just how Facebook was organized, certainly for the Freemasons, over the course of the last decade or so. And that was how we, before the advent of pages or the use of pages within the fraternity, that was how we advertised our presence in a community and really put our names out there on Facebook. Private groups have a lot of uses. To Chris's point, the Grand Lodge has one, and it's used more to speak directly to Freemasons about topics that are of Masonic interest and not public interest. But I think private groups have a really important presence within a lodge, because how many places can you go and address every member of your lodge who's active on social media, right? And I think that's something that's really impressive for me. I mean, we obviously use our trestle boards to communicate. Our trestle boards are posted on the website for many lodges. They're mailed out, but I know that, the trestle board comes out at the beginning of the month, and I may never look at it again. And as a result, something may slip my mind. So I go to a Rising Sun private page and see what's going on in my lodge, because there's all these events for, Masonic events. And lodges can utilize those as a communication tool. They can use them to share events. So what kind of uses of private groups have you seen? Chris, I know you're more active. We'll get to other social media, Scott. I promise.
No, it's okay. That's fine. I realize that, when it comes to the fraternity, in fact, with a lot of people in general, I realize that I'm in a smaller circle. Like I said, I have a Facebook account. I think I go on maybe once every 3 or 4 weeks to kind of just do a quick check, see what's what. But it doesn't fit in with how I do things, and I have my own personal reasons for not being on Facebook. But I understand that it's the dominant social media for the fraternity at this point.
And it's funny because I'm like the polar opposite of Scott. I live in the Facebook matrix.
You could probably see the little F tattooed on the back of his head.
That's right. But I mean, going back to your question, and actually not really answering your question, but sort of elaborating on it a little bit, is that I think our generations, right? Sometimes I think we rely a little bit too heavily on social media.
Oh, absolutely.
From that perspective, so you mentioned emailing trestle boards and things like that, things going in the mail. I mean, as a secretary of the lodge, at one point everything used to go in the mail, right? I mean, there wasn't any of this, not 25 years ago, and now, or less, and now sort of we a lot of lodges, a lot of organizations have adopted that. But I think that just here on this conversation between Scott and myself, Scott doesn't use Facebook as regularly, even though he has an account. I use it all the time. And if that is the only place that you're publishing information, then you're going to lose a potential portion of the audience. And that is something that's also very important, even when we talk about, groups versus pages versus different channels.
Yeah. You also, I mean, one of the things you have to look at, and Chris, you and I ran into this already, you have to worry about the focus or the filter that you're using, because Chris, I'm sure you remember back a couple of years ago, I was a member of the degree team that you put together.
Yes.
And I walked into the temple for the degree, and you looked at me and go, "Where were you? You're supposed to be here at 8." I said, I didn't get that message, and you'd put it out on the Facebook group, and I hadn't seen it.
Yeah,
but that's a good example. I mean, admittedly, it was minor because it really didn't impact a lot of stuff. But it's something to be aware of. You don't realize just because you're putting it there, a lot of people make an assumption. Well, if I'm putting it there, everybody's going to see it. And it's not just Facebook. It's in a lot of other places too. You'll see the same thing happen.
Oh, sure, yeah. And sort of that goes. And so I haven't answered your question yet, Tim, and I will come back to.
You keep talking.
But I think lodges struggle, and so I can speak from our own experience in ancient York, is that one of the things that I think we've struggled with is trying to pick those channels and stick with them that work, that are going to reach the most brothers. And sometimes I think that we run into this sort of like, okay, we're going to post everything everywhere all the time. And that's okay, but it's challenging to manage.
That could be a full-time job.
Particularly as secretary. So I think Brother Bobby had mentioned this before, and I say Brother Bobby because I don't want to butcher your last name, because I'm going to. And that is, you just sort of have to decide what it is that you're going to do from that perspective, and all agree that this is sort of these are the avenues of communication that you're going to utilize, because if you don't, like Scott's example, if you're not all on the same page, then a message can be missed by key members of a particular group, and then you run the risk of alienating brothers, or not getting the people that, targeting the people that you need to target.
Yeah, I mean, in that particular case, it was a minor, because I knew I needed to be there. I just didn't know that there was an additional rehearsal being done that morning.
Right.
So it's in the grand scheme of things, it was minor. But I mean, I could just imagine someone not getting a message that a meeting's been canceled or something, and showing up, and it's like, where is everybody? Because they didn't get the message. It was on a platform they weren't on. So that's, obviously that's something to be concerned about. The other thing to keep in mind too is that, it's not just picking the platforms you want to put the stuff on. You actually have to have people that are willing to help manage those platforms. You could say you're going to publish on everything. Well, we're going to we'll do our Facebook page, we'll do a Facebook group, we'll do a Twitter account, we'll do, X, Y, and Z, other one, Snapchat, whatever. But now you got somebody actually monitoring all of those.
Yes. Yeah. And then that's actually why I invoked Bobby's name, is because it doesn't have to be the secretary that manages all of this. It doesn't have to be the master that manages all of it. It could be a brother that's not in the officer line, that is on these channels, understands them, and can run with it. And like you said, Tim, it can be, even just with a small lodge, it can be a daunting task if you want to keep up with things, to have that, to address that with the other duties that, say, a secretary or a master has, to be able to assign that to another brother that's passionate about it, that wants to get involved. Just like anything else in a lodge, you should leverage those brothers to be able to do that. So it doesn't necessarily need to be all of the same person that's managing all of these things, as long as there's communication as to what the expectations are as far as standards for posting, etc. If that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things that not everyone has an understanding of, and Chris, I know you do certainly, is moderation of those Facebook pages and groups. I've got my notes here next to me, and I don't want to use the words that I used in my notes, but Freemasonry can occasionally attract an audience that is not what we're looking for. And I know, this came up just on a Reddit post in the Freemasonry subreddit. The conspiracy theorists who think that we are, worshiping the devil or whatever it is, or people who are from, other countries who have no exposure to Freemasonry and just send random messages. I mean, the number of messages I've seen in the Granite Cornerstone Facebook page is astounding. But those are private messages. Occasionally, those messages leak over to our public channels.
Sure. Yeah, we've given comments on YouTube that are out there. Yeah. And I mean out there. Those that say that they belong to ex-Illuminati group, that they want to recruit us. And
the Illuminati.
If I don't get at least 2 of those a week, I must be doing something wrong.
Yeah. So I mean, it's we are, I think, as Freemasons in particular, I think anyone that's out there is a target. But I think just because of the nature of the mystique and myth around what Freemasonry is, you get a lot of folks that have unique perspectives. Let's just say that on what Freemasonry is and how they want to talk to you, and so you have to sort of manage that. I can tell you as somebody that has 2 Grand Lodge, or actually multiple Grand Lodge emails as well, both from a social media perspective, because we manage those channels, and the emails, we get all kinds of nonsense, for lack of a better term. And it's something that you have to be very careful of, because you don't want those things lingering out in the public to color anyone's
and see
impressions of what Freemasonry is.
That's one of the things that really, when you look at having a social media presence, making sure you're targeting specific channels and being mindful in your targeting, because you do have to moderate those and moderate them relatively quickly. Because like you said, one of those posts sits out there for half an hour. God knows how many people have seen it. Excuse me.
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit about this sort of, in our podcast prep, as far as, being able to monitor those types of posts if you're the one doing it, but also from a personal perspective and how we utilize Facebook. For example, I have it to where on Facebook in particular, if somebody tags me in a post, right, they, for the kids, if they at me, right?
Oh, Jesus.
And they put my name in something, that I have to approve it. Like, it will come up saying, timeline review, that I have to hit the space bar, that I have to review that particular post.
It's time to lose some weight there, Chris.
Listen.
You're muting yourself with your gut. No,
it wasn't my gut, I promise.
It's a Mason bubble. Come on.
Right. That's my level, right? That you have to, be careful as far as those things, because you don't want somebody random tagging you in a post that has something objectionable in it. So you can set those limits as well, but you can also do that as far as moderation.
But to that point, Chris, it's one of the things that, frequently when we do stuff at the lodge, we do a degree program or something like that, a lot of times I'm the one that takes the photo. I may not be the one that posts it on Facebook or one of the other avenues, but I usually am the one to take the photo. Before I actually snap the photo, I actually let, especially if it's a new set of brothers that just started their journey, hey, we're taking this photo. It's going to go up on the website. It's going to go on our Facebook page. Are you comfortable with that? Right. Because there are some people who don't want their images put out there. I mean, they're few and far between, but there are a few out there.
And there are still people who maintain some level of secrecy as to their membership in the fraternity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the membership in the fraternity is still illegal in some countries. So, it's something we all have to be aware of.
And I think that's something that I know doesn't get addressed anywhere near as often as it should. You go to an installation, and the installing suite and the new officer suite are always going to be there taking a picture. And generally, enough about those individuals to be sure they're okay with it. But at the same time, how many times have I looked on Reddit and seen a picture of a 3rd degree that was just performed somewhere, or somebody was just, made a Knights Templar, and there's a picture with 8 people in it, and only one of those individuals is a Reddit user. And as a result, I've now got 7 guys whose faces are out there who may not want the public to know they're Freemasons, who may not want the public to know that they're a member of the Knights Templar, and whatever organization within Freemasonry it is. And we don't get those sort of media waivers that you would have in a lot of public spaces. And that's a consideration that's very important. One of the things I believe this is in the Grand Lodge Constitution, you cannot publish the name of a prospective member until they've completed their entered apprentice degree.
That is correct.
Yep.
And that's something, thankfully I haven't seen it happen, but that's an important aspect of this as well. We need to be aware of the content we're putting out there, the people who are part of that content, and sort of making sure that we're maintaining their privacy to a degree that they would like. we don't do that ever. Plenty of people have taken my picture and nobody's asked me if I'm okay with it being shared.
And that's something that a lodge can deal with a a disclosure or waiver of some kind to say that we'll take images and we use social media and we use the website, and your image may be included in one of those, to make sure at least that the brethren know that that's a possibility and can decline those instances. In those instances, to make sure that they are able to protect that. I would say that it's also not, and I know we're talking about Masonry here, but also even more important when we talk about sort of the youth organizations, which two of us are very heavily involved in, and publishing pictures of our children, essentially,
or other people's children,
on social media. So those are all things that lodges and brothers, because lodges all have many of them have interaction with the youth organizations as well. Not to say that the youth is the youth is more important in the way of protecting them, but from the perspective of privacy and concerns related to that, to address those issues with with all that might be involved. I'm going to shut up now.
Oh, that Scott was going to say something.
No, it's that awkward moment of silence we have to have periodically.
All right, let's not have that. So I do want to address one thing that Brother Right Worshipful Ackridge had mentioned about clutter.
Totally agree.
It's interesting. So it's a weird thing with all of the social media. They all have their own algorithms, and no one really understands them because they don't get published. None of the algorithms no one comes out and says, okay, well, this is how this works, right? But I can tell you from personal experience that certain types of posts definitely get boosted compared to others when it comes to social media, particularly with Facebook, because you have to think that Facebook allows a lot of different types of posts on it, whereas Twitter tends to be obviously more text-based. There can be media there, but everything is sort of at least based on the foundation of a text-based message. Whereas Facebook, you can do a lot of different things. Posts with images, videos, or events tend to get distributed by the algorithm, at least from my experience, further than those that are just simply text-based. On Facebook. That being said, there are brands, and again, and just for full disclosure, I come from a background of about 17, 18 years of marketing and digital marketing experience.
No, that's it. I'm done with this call.
And I'm not, I'm just saying. And what I've seen is that, as far as frequency is concerned, is that no, you don't want to drown. You don't want to post something every hour on the hour all day, but you don't necessarily only have to post one item per day, because you can post multiple items on a public page to make sure that the algorithm might pick up one thing and not another. So you're not necessarily, or a particular person in your audience might see one over the other. And we don't have necessarily, as administrators of these channels, have control over that. So if there is important information, definitely post it, but think about the frequency. Think about the time of day that you're posting, because some times of day are better to be able to post than others, and to spread that out a bit. From the perspective of a public page, it's less of an issue than on a group, because if you're spamming a group, if you're posting a lot in a group, groups on Facebook tend to receive more, those that are participating in a group tend to receive more in the way of notifications, direct notifications of individual posts than on pages. And so in those groups, if you're posting multiple times, the members of those groups are going to receive multiple notifications, may tune that out. Whereas on pages, depending on how they're following that page, and I hope I'm not getting too complicated in describing this, they may not see that even if they are following a page. So there are ways to be able to think about that frequency depending on the social media and the particular type of channel that you're using even within that media. Twitter, for example, I know Scott can speak on this probably even better than I can, or definitely even better than I can. Frequency on Twitter is not a bad thing.
No,
because
fact,
it's one of those things like you the message is gone very quickly. You need to have those quick hits on Twitter.
Well, Twitter's stream of consciousness, right?
It's right. It's flowing on a constant basis.
And to be honest with you, a lot of folks that use Twitter to communicate, especially if they're trying to communicate with a global audience, will actually post the same message multiple times.
Right.
There'll be a little, there may be a word change here or there, so it doesn't fall under the, you're just repeating yourself rule with Twitter, because they do look at that stuff. But you could see the same Twitter message. I know that in the past, when I've worked with some folks with web properties, we'd hit like 3 or 4 Twitter messages in the first 24, 36 hours a post went up on their website. Then you'd repeat it again a week later. Then you repeat it again 2 weeks later. So you have an opportunity to hit the audience that you're missing, because like you said, it just goes by so quick. I open up my Twitter feed, and before I scroll to the bottom of the screen, I've got another 20 messages in my Twitter feed.
Yeah. So. I can't do Twitter.
Well,
way too much going on.
Well, the challenge with Twitter is that Twitter relies on you to curate or filter your feed, your stream. So like I've got, X number of people I follow, they're all in the mainstream, but I actually have lists that are set up of individuals I want to follow, or lodges I want to follow, or topics I want to follow. They're all independent lists, and I can look at each one of those lists separate from the entire stream. And the nice thing about those lists is that I don't have to follow that person. I could actually pick up all the Twitter feed from Chris without ever following Chris. As long as I have his handle, I can find it all, because Twitter is a public platform. It doesn't have if you want to go private on Twitter, you go private, and no one sees your messages unless you give them permission to see them.
That's a very important.
Yeah, it's a very hard line on Twitter. I have a couple of individuals that keep their Twitter messages to a very small select group, because they're afraid of the ramifications of some of the messages that they're putting out. Not because they're of the content, but because from a mental state that they're in, they don't want to deal with the negativity that could come back from it. Especially when you're learning about a topic, or you're sharing stuff that's rather personal, you want to make sure that the group you're working with understands that and can appreciate it and gives you the support you need. You don't need to have 100,000 people suddenly saying you shouldn't do that, or I can't believe you said that. Some of us live a little bit more out there in the public on Twitter. I've had several Twitter streams that I've actually had to shut down or taken myself out of, because I didn't want my audience to see the ongoing back and forth that's happening, because I got copied into the thread or started off of one of my thread. Yeah. That's one of the things, like in Facebook, you could @ somebody, and a lot of times people now reply to everybody that's on the thread, and now it's like 4, 5, 6 messages in. All right, you guys have gone off on a tangent. I don't want my audience to see this anymore. So then I just cut myself out of it. So I mean, it's a very different platform.
Well, so Brian Ellis asks, is Twitter big in Masonry? And I know, Scott, you and I have talked about it a little bit, but what have you seen in Masonic Twitter? That's how they talk about Twitter, right?
Well, right. Well, I mean, when you look at Twitter and Masonry, it's a very mixed bag, because you've got some areas that basically everybody was told, get a Twitter account, use it. But we've actually had several brothers out there that their Twitter feed is a constant stream of articles, stuff that's being posted that's related to the Masonry. So it makes it really nice if you're trying to find something in particular. I don't think that Twitter as a whole is as large for the Masonic fraternity as a whole that Facebook is, or at least it doesn't have the same public facing as Facebook does when it comes to Masonry. You don't have, I mean, I do know, and I do follow a lot of lodges and a lot of Grand Lodges, because they have Twitter accounts. Some are more posted to frequently than others. Some I think haven't seen posts in several years. But but you see the same thing on Facebook. Someone will start a Facebook page for a lodge and it never gets updated. So it becomes just a billboard that's out there, and you go, okay, well, it's the same thing as your website.
Yeah.
It's
and
like,
and you have the sort of potential negative aspect of that, where you have just like if you have a website that doesn't get updated, if you have social media channels that don't get updated at least somewhat regularly, you might have a perspective, somebody that might be interested in Freemasonry that might look at a channel and say, oh, well, that hasn't been updated in 6 months, they must not be active. And
sure.
that's sort of a visceral thing. I mean, that, I think most people can think about it and say, well, that might not be true. But I think that the initial reaction of that is, oh, maybe I need to look at something else, or, maybe this group is not relevant. And so that's the risk you run, I think, when creating these channels. And so to your point, Scott, you have to be very, very cognizant of the fact that, that how that's looked at by the public at large, especially when we're trying
Right.
to attract men to the fraternity.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a challenge no matter what platform you use. But I just pulled up my Twitter account on the other screen, and I've got one list that I've curated down to 175 Twitter accounts on that particular one. Some of them follow me back. I follow some of them. Some of them I just keep an eye on because they've got interesting stuff that pops up. I've got lists that are for U.S. Grand Lodges and for non-U.S. Grand Lodges. So there's a lot of Twitter out there for Masonry, but keep in mind, it's a different type of flavor. It's not, you don't get as much back and forth. It's that town crier type thing where, hey, this is what's going on. Now, admittedly, a lot of times if you get a response, you usually get very positive, or you get something that's, as we talked about earlier, at the other end of the spectrum, the conspiracies and those kinds of things. And, there's a lot of that out on Twitter. Twitter isn't as well policed as some of the other social medias out there.
There's a lot more anonymity, I think, that
there can be,
is from just the perception, I think, of the various social media channels. I think that there's definitely more anonymity felt in Twitter, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing as far as sort of the tone of conversations out there. I will say, and Scott, you mentioned this before, just as a reminder, it's interesting because globally, I think Twitter is very much used for Masonry, and probably less so in the United States. But if you look at the United Grand Lodge of England, the provincial Grand Lodges, right? You've mentioned this, all sort of have mandated, you have to have a Twitter account.
I mean, if you take a look at the especially the English lodge, a lot of the English lodges have active Twitter accounts. In fact, I've swapped messages with several guys that maintain websites and Twitter feeds for their lodges across the pond, so to speak. But and it's a very different approach. They've got they're much more concerned about what they put out there and how they put it out there, because especially in England, there's a very different perception of what a Mason is versus what we have here in the States.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So there's another. I want to address Dave Ackridge's comment in a minute, but there's a comment about Masonic content on TikTok.
It's funny that gets mentioned, because even just today, I do have a TikTok account.
Oh,
big surprise!
Guilty.
Chris, is there a social media platform you're not on?
The 45-year-old? No, there isn't actually.
I bet you there might be one.
Except some of the political ones I can.
No, I bet you there's a privacy focused one that's out there that you're probably not on.
Probably not. But it's funny because I was sort of just kind of scrolling on TikTok, and for those that don't know what TikTok is, it's sort of the inheritor of Vine, and what Vine and TikTok, Vine was and TikTok is just these very short form video. Right. It's a definitely video based platform. Usually the videos are less than a minute, sometimes as little as 10 or 15 seconds. And I was scrolling through, not targeting anything, just looking at just sort of what's being recommended to me. And I don't follow any Facebook groups or excuse me, TikTok accounts that are associated with Masonry. And I had a pro-Masonic post come up. But equally, I've seen a lot of conspiratorial anti-Masonic things come up.
So the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I just opened up TikTok on my other monitor, and yes, there's a lot of like devil horns and pentagrams and all sorts of stuff on there when you talk about Freemasonry. But there's, I mean, I'm looking at a content creator here. His name is Widows Miho. He's got 67,000 followers, and almost every single post on his TikTok is Facebook related. There's a guy, Freemasonry Explained, brother and Shriner out of Oklahoma, with almost 10
Freemasonry related, not Facebook related. Is that what you meant?
Oh, that's what I meant. Sorry.
Okay.
And he's got almost 10,000 followers.
So
on
before
his TikTok.
So before everybody goes out hunting, no, I'm not on TikTok.
That surprises no one. But
District Deputy Grand Master, come on now.
John Ramsdell brought this up, or maybe it was, I don't know. It was, so John Ramsdell brought this up. The channels are always changing. I would never in my life have considered TikTok a place to go for Masonic content, but apparently it does relatively well.
Yeah.
And how do we adapt to identifying these ever-changing platforms and making, that's it right there. Widows Miho is great. So how do we adapt as lodges, as people, to finding these content creators or these content platforms and making the best use of them?
Ask your kids. Yeah. I know that sounds ridiculous. And so Dave Right Where Flackridge, Dave Ackridge had mentioned, have we considered a social media 101, and actually we've put some of that stuff together. We were actually tasked a while ago to put together, event planning based recommendations associated with open houses. And we actually have that about 90% done. And then what happened after we began writing that was COVID. But no, we don't have that. And
Chris, go ahead and bring that up.
It's hard. It's hard for brothers. It's hard for anyone to keep up with that. I mean, I fully acknowledge it as somebody. Excuse me, acid reflux. If somebody that lives sort of in that world, I find it difficult to keep up with. So,
to that point, Chris, I think the problem isn't necessarily keeping up with it. The problem is that each of us has those channels which we're comfortable with, or the ones that we understand.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, let's face it. I mean, if you came to me and say, "Hey, Scott, I want you to run a whole bunch of stuff on Facebook for me," I'm going to struggle with it just because I'm not familiar with the platform. I don't use the platform. Likewise, if I said, "Hey, can you handle all this Twitter stuff for me?" There's a really good chance you're going to go, as long as it's cut and paste, I'm good. But the whole the management of a Twitter feed is very different than Facebook. I mean, there's some similarities, obviously, but then you go off onto some of the other platforms, the Snapchats, the TikToks, the Instagram. I don't know of many lodges that are utilizing LinkedIn, but you could do a business page for a lodge on LinkedIn just as easy as you can anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, you look at other social media platforms. YouTube is a social media platform.
Absolutely.
Posting content to YouTube. I mean, St. Mark's just did a cornhole tournament. If you had somebody who had filmed that, you could put that video up, or the victory lap of, I believe it was Gus won again, right?
Yes, with a different partner this year.
Okay, but again, you could put something like that up on YouTube and share it. YouTube is harder to build an audience, in my opinion. Because it's an impersonal social media platform, but it's still a way to get the word out there. Put it on your Facebook page, link to your YouTube, a link to your YouTube on your website, and you can share different kinds of content that may not be as digestible on those other platforms. And I think that's really important. This TikTok thing is a surprise to me. I might have to sign myself up and see what's going on Mason Talk, somebody called it. So see what's going on there. But
Well, but that goes back to I think a central point that you have to take a look at when you're building an online presence. And Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong. One of the things you want to take a look at is where's your source of truth going to be. In other words, if I want to have people be able to reach out to the organization, if I want to be able to reach out to my lodge, I want to give them a lot of different avenues. But if I want to say this is where I want to generate everything from, or where I want to drive everything to, you should pick a spot. That way, where the quote unquote funnel is. I know at one point with St. Mark's, it was the website. Everything went to the website first, and then everything pointed back to the website.
Yeah.
It's not quite so much that way now, because like everything else, everything's kind of shifted over to Facebook. Everybody's kind of forgotten about there's a web out there still. But yeah, it's something it's something you should think about when you put together a social media plan for your lodge, or your even yourself. Where do you want to post, and what do you going to post about? How are you going to go about it? And are you trying to drive traffic to a specific place at the other end of the funnel? So,
yeah, and it goes back to everyone that especially within the lodge, needing to sort of know where to expect information and content, because that ultimately, that tends to be sort of our number one audience is ourselves, right?
Yes.
It's not our only audience by any stretch of the imagination, but we tend to talk to ourselves in that way to be able to get guys engaged in the various things that we're doing.
Some talk to themselves more than others.
I talk to myself all the time, but that's not related to this conversation. I'm just insane. But
admitted on YouTube. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, there's no secret there. But I think that I think that you kind of need to decide where your audience exists. Now, to the earlier point that Tim made, and I just kind of want to backtrack a little bit, and that is that people are posting negative stuff about Freemasonry in every single one of these channels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Every single one of them. So as a fraternity, I'm not saying that the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire needs to be, I'm not saying that every lodge needs to be, but as a fraternity, globally, we need to be aware, and we need to be not responding to those things, but putting out a message that is true to who we are, so that we have a narrative out there, and that we can tell our story out there. Because you're never going to defeat. If your goal is to defeat the negative or to defeat the conspiracies, it's not going to happen. You're going to lose. So we need to focus on sort of the positive message about what the fraternity is and who we are, so that we might not necessarily drown out that noise, but we can be a response to it in our own
without engaging it.
Yeah, I mean, if you engage it, you're going to lose. I have examples of that.
Oh yeah,
of trying to engage it, and
I think
the folks that don't like Masonry are never going to like Masonry, and you're really not going to change their mind.
No, and I agree with that. I think I've had some instances where those that put the negative message out in response to something that I've posted.
Yeah.
It's a rational conversation afterwards. The vast majority aren't, but there are a few out there that every once in a while it's like, this is what I believe, this is where I think you're incorrect. It's and you can do it back and forth. But I follow what I call a 3-comment rule. So I'll put something out there, I get the response back. If it's a negative response, I might ask for clarification. I may just say, hey, sorry, I realize that you've got your own opinion. If the next comment comes back from that same individual and it's in that negative zone, I'm done. I just shut the conversation down at that point. That's my rule. Everybody has their own limit, but I know that if I get 2 comments in a row being argumentative like that from someone who wants to sit on the opposite side of the fence, most of the time, that's all it's going to be from that point forward. And it's not worth the energy.
I think you can tell from the context or from the number of insane capital letters that they use, generally, whether those people are presenting what they consider a legitimate condemnation that maybe they have a misunderstanding, or if they're one of those people, right? I think that there's there are certainly people who kind of blend on the line, but I think that you can generally tell by looking at the context of the post what sort of person you're engaging with, and you need to know when to jump in and when not to. And I think that's what, I don't want, I didn't want to, this is something that's important to say is, when you engage with those people or you engage with any topic that's slightly controversial, if you're an active member of this fraternity, there's a good chance that everyone who follows you, friends with you on social media knows it. And engaging in that kind of behavior or acknowledging it, it does tend to be an acknowledgement on behalf of the fraternity from people who are not a part of it.
It's a slippery slope. Yeah.
It is.
Yes, it is.
You represent Freemasonry anytime you're posting to a platform where your presence as a Mason is known, and the things that you say, the people you engage with, the arguments you get in, unfortunately reflect on the fraternity, because most of my non-Masonic friends on Facebook, I am one of, if not the only Freemason they know. And one thing from me could set them on a path of thinking this is how the fraternity is. I know I've heard it secondhand from, people. Oh, this person I know is a Freemason and he's a real pain. Are you all like that? And, unfortunately, there is that perception out there of, the fraternity, and we need to make sure that we do everything we can to protect the image of the fraternity as much as we can. It's a hefty responsibility for each and every one of us, but I think it's an important responsibility for us to acknowledge.
A lot of people have an opinion on what we are, and so when you're in that situation of having to, sort of not address it, but just be this, the object of that sort of criticism or opinion, whatever we do is going to be a huge, is going to have that impact. Sorry, Scott, you were going to say something.
No, I think it's, when you think about posting, we talk about how, for a lot of people, we are the face of the fraternity. It's just an extension of something we've talked about several times in the past. You've got you're guarding the West Gate. It's the same thing. When you're posting out on media, you're part of that filter that people are using to determine whether or not they're interested in how you respond to things and how you interact with those people. It's part of that same process, because you may have a conversation with somebody on one of these social media platforms, and 6 months later, they've joined the fraternity wherever they happen to be located. It may not be in our jurisdiction. It may be somewhere else. So, I mean, it's something to think about, is that you need to understand that, both good and bad can come out of those conversations, and like it or not, we're the face of the fraternity.
Well, which goes to the Grand Lodge's social media policy and other things, and that's why those things are important. The Grand Lodge of New Hampshire, beyond sort of the communications committee, doesn't have any further sort of PR arm to it. We all are that, right?
When you say we all are, every single one of the 4,500 plus members in this jurisdiction.
Yeah, you bet. And so, if we, obviously, no one's trying to subvert anyone's, speech on their platforms, but we are, social media provides a very unique opportunity and a unique potential pitfall for us, because we have there's just such power in it.
Yeah, there is, and it's one of those things that you with great power comes great responsibility. I've heard that quote somewhere before. But I think one of the things that you can do, and like you said, no one's trying to stop you from speaking your mind. By all means, it's one of the foundational pieces of Freemasonry is that we're all entitled to our opinion. We're all should be able to speak our opinion and be able to have a civil discourse on what we're talking about. But one of the things that I always look at is that when you go to post something, is it something you would have been comfortable saying in front of your mother? And
that's a good rule.
And if you're not comfortable doing that, then maybe you shouldn't post it. Now I realize that for
And
some people that's a much wider view of things, but you know, it's just something to keep in mind. You know, I forget where I saw it, but someone actually on his website, you know, those things that we all used to go to, his comment at the top of his comment section of every single one of his posts, you know, among his rules were, if you were having this conversation in my living room and your mother walked in, would she want to read this? You know,
yeah,
and it puts things in perspective for you. You
It's
know,
easy
I
for us.
think,
It's easy for us to lose our heads because I think there's that separation that becomes a little bit impersonal.
yeah,
And like you talk about Twitter. Twitter. It can be a little abusive sometimes out there.
it can be a bit spicy. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, just thinking about sort of that social media is an extension of ourselves and how we would interact with other human beings, I think is really important.
yeah, and I think that one of the tenets of this fraternity is being mindful, being introspective, and
Yeah.
thinking about the actions that you take. And Dave Ackridge, put a little piece in the comments there on YouTube. Ever walked and act as such, and that's every interaction you are a Freemason. If you are the guy who has a Freemason bumper sticker or has a Freemason license plate in Massachusetts, and you cut somebody off or you're a rude driver, it's going to reflect on you. And I know, listen, I'm not the most calm driver on the road,
Really?
but I know that when I had a Masonic emblem on my car, I was always mindful of the fact that I had a Masonic emblem on my car, you know, um, and you got to think like that when you're operating in this world. It's very easy to forget that.
And I think about a long time ago, I decided, I got involved in Rainbow, and again, I'm bringing up the youth organizations, but it's super important. Is that I've got, and I've sort of made a rule, and all of the advisors in the youth organization sort of make a rule that I'm not going to friend a friend a youth necessarily, but if they friend me, that's fine. Proactively on their end. But those girls, in Rainbow, because I'm very involved in Rainbow, see what we do. We're supposed to be the examples of what it means to be a just and upright Mason. And so the question that I ask is not about my mother necessarily, is about, if a Rainbow girl reads this, is it going to be okay? Is that an acceptable message for them to read? And so that's constantly in my mind.
Yeah, and I think that's a good approach to take. Just again, run it through your head and say, is this the right thing to post? And just whether it's Scott talking about, is this something your mother should read, or to Chris's point, is this something a Rainbow girl should read? It's very important to understand that you are an example at every moment that you interact with anyone anywhere. I wear a Masonic ring on my finger. I go out and I do something stupid or I do something rude, that I'm now guilty. You're all guilty by association with me, because I'm the only example they have of Freemasonry. And if that's what the Masons are like, then that's what they're like. And that's not fair, because not everyone in this fraternity is exactly the same. But unfortunately, it's human nature.
It's human, yeah.
That's exactly it's just something we have to live with. So this has been a great discussion owing to the hour, and I understand there's a football game on tonight that a lot of people want to watch, and started about 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, I know. I got the notification on my watch.
Yeah. I want to wrap this up. So
Masonry does not rest for football.
It does not, but hey.
Now, admittedly, we did run an episode. Wasn't it the Super Bowl or something we ran an episode
on? Yes, we did. But Tom Brady's coming back to Boston tonight.
So yeah, it's a Tom Brady visit. Yeah, so I'm sure that there are people that have got that on their other screen right now.
So Scott, any final words to share with our audience?
The only thing I would say is, brother, and don't be afraid of social media, but be mindful of what you're doing on it. And if you have questions, reach out to the communications committee, because I know that email address is going to go up on the screen, and the Cornerstone podcast email address will go up on the screen. And but yeah, I think that's one of the things that it's important that we all kind of stay mindful of what we're doing. And at the end of the day, it's just another tool that we can use to raise awareness. We just have to be cognizant of what we're doing on it.
and I couldn't say that any better. I mean, that's ultimately what it is. And another thing, just really quickly, that Tim, you and I talked about a little bit, but we didn't mention is that it's Facebook and all the social media channels, or even search engines, are great ways to be able to advertise what you're doing on a relatively cheap basis. If you want to put out some advertising money to be able to specifically target a group to come to your event or about your lodge in the community, there are ways to be able to do that as well. So definitely reach out to us, because between the members of the communications committee, we all have that experience in one way, shape, or form. So we are happy. This is part of what we're here to do is to be able to help brothers and help lodges get the message out and provide some recommendations. So please reach out to us for that.
And just to kind of piggyback on what Chris said, you're not going to find a cheaper way to advertise. You're not going to find a cheaper way to engage your audience than using social media. The Scottish Rite, Northern Masonic Jurisdiction, just did their Not Just a Man, a Mason campaign. Yeah. And those materials are available for every lodge to use. Find a platform that works. Be consistent in messaging on that platform. Try new things. See if they work. And if they don't, so be it. But don't be afraid to try. And reach out to the communications committee, reach out to the podcast team, which is 3/5 of the communications committee. If you have any questions, we are more than happy to help you figure out what it is you need to get started on social media, to kind of improve your presence. And thank you for joining us tonight. We will be back on November the 7th, and we'll see you then. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our guests this evening, and have a good night, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Good night, Tim and Scott. Good night, brethren. Thank you.